Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Whether you are participating on Zoom or on YouTube or Facebook page of the Liberal Jewish Synagogue. Today we mark Yom Ha-Shoah, the Holocaust Memorial Day, and we will begin with a memorial service, and then there will be a few guests and speakers. All the texts you will see will appear on the screen, and if you are on Zoom or on YouTube, please feel free to leave messages on the chat, especially for the memorial part where we will remember names. In the Jewish tradition, there are those who have turned to silence as an act of faith or in rejection of faith. The believers remind us of the biblical tradition of Aaron, who was silent after the death of his sons. The shortest, most anguished sentence in the Torah, Vayidom Aaron, and Aaron was silent. Aaron's silence was the silence of humility, a continuing strong affirmation of God in a world which had become dark. We honor the silent mourners in our midst, the children of Aaron. Alongside them, we see another company of silence. It is composed of those who have rejected the religious vision, who've lost the way to God and embraced the courage to despair. In a bleak and dark secular world, they speak for the majority, yet the silence can lead to forgetting, can lead to ignorance. We need words, we need rituals and worship. We know that the enormity of our loss cannot be placed in the human discourse. The tremendum of the Shoah is somewhere beyond the boundary of human understanding, but there comes a time, as it came to Job after his long and brooding silence, when one has to stand up and cry out. That cry is a prayer. It addresses God. It addresses humanity.
How long, O Eternal One, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted.
I was born in Lvov in 1932. I was called Nunya, and my life was that of a normal, happy child. In 1939, the Russians unexpectedly marched through the streets of Lvov, and in 1940, the bombardments started. The Germans had arrived. Suddenly, the bombs started falling all around us. My mother would take me by the hand, and we would run down the 3 floors to the cellar. She was sometimes sick down there. The persecution of the Jews escalated at a fast pace. We were told to leave our apartment and all our belongings and to move out to an area outside Lvov. This was in preparation for sending us to the ghetto. We left in haste, only taking with us a small suitcase, and went to live in a small house where we were allocated a tiny room for all 5 of us. We did not have much food, and the money must have run out quickly. I remember my mother giving us some potatoes and cooking the peelings as well. She only ate some peelings. After a while, her body started to swell from what I assume was the lack of food. My mother, she does not laugh. She does not smile. She hardly speaks. My mother, she looks sad, pale, and distant. In my mind, there is a rush of questions. Where is my father? What happened to my grandmother? These words are never uttered. I remain silent, and my mother does not speak. I want to show her that I care, but I do not know how. I cannot cry anymore, and my feelings are now numb.
על נהרות בבל שם ישבנו, גם בכינו, וזוכרנו את ציון. על ערבים בתוכה תלינו כנורותינו, כי שם שלנו שובינו דברי שיר, ותוללנו שמחה. שירו לנו משמע ציון, איך נשיר את שיר אדוני על אדמת נחור. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept as we remembered Zion. There on the willows we hung up our harps, for there our captors asked of us a song, and our tormentors required of us mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." Yet how shall we sing a song of the Eternal One in a strange land?
Eva, could you please unmute your microphone, please?
The train carried us slowly across Europe for 3 days and nights. We were pressed together in the darkness like condemned animals whose small stink pail for toilet, with one small stinking pail for a toilet and another for water. Once a day, the train would jolt to a stop, and screaming guards would fling open the door, blinding us with daylight, and throw in some pieces of bread before we lurched into the disorientating twilight world once more. People cried, people prayed, and willed with hopelessness in the intense summer heat.
אלה אזכרה, נפשי עלי אשפכה, כבלעונו זדים כעוגה בלי הפוכה. זאת נקרתנו וסיפרנו בשונים, ושפכנו לב שפוי ונון, מי מרום הסכת תחנון, אדוני, אדוני אל רחום וחנון. These things I recall and pour out my soul. How the arrogant have devoured us. This has happened to us. We tell it again and again. We pour out our hearts full of grief. You who are in heaven, hear our prayer. You, O Eternal One, are a God of mercy and compassion.
Dostępne kind, Mechaber Kaczerginski, Musik Janko Krimski, gesungen durch Mechaber, Amatone Sorle Krimsken in New York und a Geruß der Mannen in New York. Es jagt mich, wer jagt, und lässt nicht zurück. Oh Mame, mein Mame, wo bist du? Es sucht dich dein Sorel, es ruft dich dein Kind. Fleuet uns jommert in Feld der Wind. Es sucht dich dein Sorel, es sucht dich dein Kind. Fleuet uns jommert in Feld der Wind. Der Tate nicht auf, wer weiß wo ist. Es hat ihn gefangen, a grausamer Ries. Die Nacht schwarz gewesen ist, wenn das ist geschehen. Noch schwarzer der Pony, mein Mames gewesen. Die Nacht schwarz gewesen ist, wenn das ist geschehen. Noch schwarzer der Pony, mein Mames gewesen. In Umruf und Tag, in Wander von Nacht, in Umruf und Schlaf liegt das Kind und es darf. O Kind meins, sie hört von Taten betrieb. Die Mame verwiegt dir und singt dir das Lied, als du wirst einmal a Mamele sein. Sollst du deine Kinder der Sehung dem Fein, was Tate, was Mame gehabt hat zum Feind. Der Mond wird das morgen, vergesst jos nicht ein, was Tate, was Mame gehabt hat zum Feind. Der Mond wird das morgen, vergesst das nicht ein.
Eva, can you unmute yourself, please? Are you able to unmute, Eva?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you.
It's all right now?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah? See, it's not, I can't read it in here. Auschwitz was a world of filth, starvation, deprivation, and small gestures of solidarity. I had never planned for anything more complicated than a game of marbles. But now I learned to fight for my food ration in the necessary starve myself by buttering my bread for other things which I need more. I soon saw that civilization is thin veneer, easily stripped away, and I realized life's truth necessity, like having your own cup of food, a drink, so that you could make sure that you always got your share. Mutti and I had survived through luck, willpower, and the protection of many. We had outlasted what I believe was the most evil ideology, the eternal cleansing and killing in history. The Nazis had chased our family across Europe, driven by crazed obsession and determining not to stop until every Jew was dead. I was alive, but I would have to relearn how to live and find my place in a world that often didn't want to know about the horrors that I had seen.
הנשמה והגוף פולח, חוסה, חוסה, המלאך, הנשמה לך והגוף פולח, חוסה, חוסה, המלאך, הנשמה לך והגוף פולח, חוסה, חוסה,
You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces. Consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty and womb cold as a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you're in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble, disease render you powerless, your offspring avert their faces from you.
Thinking back over our journey in the synagogue that day, I realized that for the first time in my life, I had come to accept Bergen-Belsen. It had become part of my life without being any longer an emotional burden. The experience had finally been incorporated into my existence. It lives in my memory. Sitting in the synagogue and recalling the horrors of 60 years ago, I suddenly appreciated that I had arrived toward the end of my life at a perfect moment of peace. I feel no pain, no anger, and no hate. Bergen-Belsen was the ultimate test of survival, the worst and the best event of my life. The best because, like a survivor of an air crash, I seem to have walked away unscathed. I gathered strength from the belief that nothing in my subsequent life could match our experience there. Now, having revisited all the stages of our journey, I have found true compensation for the evil of the past in the help, kindness, and understanding of many people along the way. But when all is said and done, it was only a journey from a small provincial town in Hungary to somewhere else, and then back again.
Ele eskera, nafshi alai espacha, ki vela'unu zitim kuga beli hafucha, sot karatanu, v'zipanu, v'shinu, v'shafachnu le shafur v'anun, mi maram haske tachanun. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. These things I recall and pour out my soul. How the arrogant have devoured us. This has happened to us. We tell it again and again. We pour out our hearts full of grief. You who are in heaven, hear our prayer. You, O Eternal One, are a God of mercy and compassion.
I have taken this oath to remember all, to remember and never to forget, forgetting nothing of this till 10 generations pass, and the grief disappears and all the pain, and the punishing blows are ended for good. I swear this night of terror shall not have passed in vain. I swear this morning I'll not live unchanged, as if it were no longer events now, even now.
God full of compassion, exalted God, grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence among the holy and pure who shine at the brightness of the firmament, to the souls of the millions of our people who died for the sanctification of your name. Merciful God, shelter them forever under your wings, and let their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May they find their destiny in your nearness, and may they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. And before we begin to read the Kaddish, another memorial prayer, I will pause for a second for us to think of those who perished in Holocaust, for those millions of people who were murdered during the Shoah. Normally we would leave some time for all people, for all of you, to come and light a candle in memory of your relatives or people you knew. And now we will just take this time and we will wait a little bit. If you would like to share their names on the chat, please do so. Or you can just think of them. You can just say their name out loud or in your heart. May their memory be for a blessing. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה. בעלמא דברה חירותה וימליך מלכותה. בחייכון וביום מכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מבורך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו לאלה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל בני אדם ואמרו אמן. May the Most High, source of perfect peace, grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all humanity. And let us all say, Amen.
יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה. אדוני ישמרך מכל רע ישמור את נפשך. אדוני ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם.
Thank you to all of you who participated in the service this evening. Your presence and your voices are important to all of us because each one of you has their own story to tell of survival, of rescue, of irredeemable loss, of being the child of a survivor. We are grateful to each one of you and to Tammy for your beautiful singing and for helping us to bridge that unfathomable gap between the experience of those who lived and died in those years and our own lives. Each year, as we commemorate this sad and solemn anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943, the date that was chosen to become a day to remember those who had perished in the Shoah, I am conscious that the passage of time moves us further away from the tragedy and horror of the Holocaust. Those who survived the degradation and suffering of being uprooted, deported, and the concentration camps, those who had to grow up suddenly as refugee children, having lost families and friends, grow a little older. But their memories, their stories, become yet more critical, more pressing in today's world. And we, their listeners, become even more aware that we are the inheritors of those who have borne and continue to bear witness. Because when they are gone, it will fall on our shoulders to continue to tell the next generation what we know from having listened to them. This evening's conversation would not have happened without the help of Bill Shipsey, founder of Art for Amnesty, who introduced me to Simon Boughton, the publisher of NICKY and VERA, and to the author and illustrator Peter SiS'S. And I'm very grateful to you, Bill. I know you are here with us this evening for this event. Tonight, we are honored to welcome to the Liberal Jewish Synagogue our three speakers. Peter SiS'S, whose book NICKY and VERA tells the story in words and images of the quiet Englishman, Nicholas Winton, who rescued nearly 700 children from Czechoslovakia in 1938 and 1939. Peter was born in Brno, Czechoslovakia, and attended college in Prague and London. He later moved to the United States, where he was granted asylum and became a citizen in 1989. He has received many honors and prizes for his books and works. And these have included the Hans Christian Andersen Medal, the Boston Globe Hornbook Award 4 times, and the New York Times Best Illustrated Book Award 8 times. With us too is Simon Boughton, who set up a new children's and young adult publishing program for W.W. Norton and Company, the publishers who published Peter's book. Simon's first job was at London-based Kingfisher Books, He moved to the USA in 1986 and has held positions at the Macmillan Children's Publishing Group, Random House Children's Books, and Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. Also with us this evening is Dame Esther Rantzen, journalist and broadcaster, who presented the BBC television series That's Life for 21 years, and who discovered Nicholas Winton and facilitated the moving encounter on television of Winton with some of those he had rescued, their children and grandchildren. Esther founded Childline, promoting child protection, as well as the Silver Line, designed to combat loneliness in older people's lives. She is patron of scores of charities and has focused her work on children and young people, the elderly and vulnerable. She's also a member of the Liberal Jewish Synagogue. Thank you all for agreeing to join together for this conversation this evening, to introduce Peter's book On This Side of the Pond, and to hear more about how one turns the story of Nicky and Vera into a children's book. Peter, if I could start by asking you, how did the book Nicky and Vera, which tells this rather extraordinary story of rescue against the dark shadows of Nazism, come about?
So it's special to be with you on Yom Ha-Shoah today, and I'm grateful that not only we can look at the new book, but most of all that I can see Dame Esther Rantzen, who, this is a book about one hero, but in the way she's a hero of that book, because without her, Nicholas Winton wouldn't be introduced. I grew up in Prague. I lived in Prague for 33 years, walking on the cobblestones, wondering about the history of Prague. Then because of my art, I eventually got to the United States. I did books, I did films, I met my wonderful wife, and we had 2 kids. And when my son was about 15 years old, we made a trip, which fathers do with sons sometimes, to go back to where I grew up and to show him Prague and to tell him about the history of the cobblestones. And on one of these trips, we got to the National Museum in Prague, where you have lots of Czech national heroes in the main entrance, but this time it was full of middle-aged people who were celebrating something with the giant cake made of chocolate with the train steam engine on it, and everybody was very cheerful. And my son got interested because of the heroes, but also the giant chocolate cake. And we said, what is going on? And this was the 100th birthday of Sir Nicholas Winton. And these were the children, these were the grown-up children who went on the train in 1939 from Prague to London. And sort of we got a short version of the story of Nicholas Winton. And all of a sudden I started to see this is an amazing story connecting Prague, connecting people who, I had an address of Lady Milena Baines since 1966, not knowing that she's one of the children from the Winton train. So everything sounded like a wonderful story, and did more research, and we started to talk about it with Simon as a possible book. And this came just in the time, in the past 5 years in America, which also was a very dark time in a way. And this was a story of the man who was man giving hope, who was a young banker, young stockbroker who goes through Prague, has no reason to help anybody, but because he sees something can be done for all these refugees who came from Sudetenland, and he can see what might happen to Europe and to the world. He says, I have to do something. And just in a very short time, he arranges for 8 trains, which take children from Prague to England. So basically that was the story. It was very hard to do as a book for children because it was a story of somebody who was so good, and then he doesn't speak about what he did for 50 years. He's so humble, and for whatever reason, he just doesn't become like a celebrity who says, I saved all these people. And same time my son was at school, they were supposed to give a definition of who is the hero. Hero is somebody who defends who defends anything good moral. And Nicholas Winton was this amazing quiet hero in this time of very loud heroes. And he's, according to the story, his wife is going through crates in the attic and finds a book. And then probably it gets to Dame Esther Rantzen, who invites him to the television show. And then it's like a best.
We're going to get to the television show in just a minute.
So that basically was the idea for the book.
It's important. It's an important part of the story. But before we do that, you give the characters of Nicholas Winton and Vera Gissing, one of the children he rescued, great character. And you show us something about Nicholas Winton's childhood in pre-war Britain, and which you can see here in one of the illustrations in Peter's book. And you also show Vera's happy childhood, which suddenly becomes very turbulent. I think we're just going to see a couple of slides from your book.
And maybe Simon could say something, if he would be kind enough, about Vera, because she was essential to tell the story, which was really, life of Nicholas Winton was very low-key. He never liked to talk too much about what he did. So Vera was the essential sort of child in the book, to show life of the little girl who lives in small town outside of Prague. And
Simon, do you want to come in here with the next slide, which we're going to show?
Sure. This is one of the this is one of the pages that shows Vera's world, if you will. And the challenge with the story, as Peter said, was that you had a hero who was a man of few words. And as a storyteller, that's quite a challenging thing to deal with. And one of the great kind of strokes of authorial genius, if you will, with this book was to find Vera's voice. Vera was so talkative. She gave a lot of interviews. She wrote her own book. And she created this wonderful sort of picture of life in Czechoslovakia for her before the war, and a childhood in Czechoslovakia that contrasts so beautifully in both its sort of texture and color with Nicholas's very quiet, sort of taciturn almost voice. So the book is told in these two voices. One is quite garrulous, quite talkative. One very quiet, very restrained. And the pictures are also appear in two voices. One very colorful, very rich, full of these beautiful colors that you see on this page, and one in much more muted gray tones, which you can see in the pictures of Nicky's life that kind of reflects his quietness. But I think in terms of sort of making this story accessible to child readers, Vera plays a very important role, because she speaks to the reader in their own voice, and she's a very relatable character for a young reader. So she was the kind of magic ingredient, I think, in this story.
Thank you. Peter, how difficult was it to balance the story of the rescue of the children against the darkness and evil of the Nazi regime? The book is intended for quite young children, I think, in primary school.
It was difficult in the sense that in the beginning, I thought it's just the story of Nicholas, who's so brave and who's so enthusiastic that he manages to get these trains going, and he writes to President Roosevelt and he writes to other world leaders, but he doesn't get help. He says, I could have saved thousands more. But more I was trying to find the voice of the children. I found out all the sadness and darkness behind it. I was surprised that I was born in 1949 in Brno, and I went to art school in Prague, and I mentioned working on this book to one of my colleagues from art school, and she said, my oldest sister was one of these children, and my mother brought her to the train, but she couldn't leave her on the train, so she brought her back home. They both went to Theresienstadt sort of luckily they survived the war. She said another little girl got B spot on the train. So in the way it was lucky for 2 girls, but they both went through this very awful time, which I in the way couldn't imagine. And through these little stories and reading more about it, I realized that it was very difficult time, and that these children sometimes were told, you're going, well, everybody was hoping they're going just for a few months, just for a few weeks, and they will come back because this danger is not so bad as people say, and Hitler wouldn't cross the borders. And then, of course, things unfolded very quickly. And the first train is actually leaving on the in March 1939, just when the Germans take over what is Czechoslovakia, what is Czech and Moravian part of Czechoslovakia. And then the last train doesn't make it because 250 children are supposed to go on the train, which leaves 1st of September 1939. And the train doesn't make it because Germany attacks Poland, and second war really unfolds. And so through these children who, I even made a painting of children dressed up in different costumes, thinking they expecting adventure, but it was very difficult to sort of assuming what anybody was thinking, and then to find out the stories of the children who were with the families in England, Scotland, in America, who became part of these families. Most of the stories are, I think, nice, and I'm very touched that even today I'm touched with a number of these children in different parts of the world and who have this wonderful memory of Nicholas Winton.
Esther, you really discovered Sir Nicholas Winton and what he had done, and in that very moving moment brought him into a television studio as part of an audience with scores of the children he'd rescued, together with their children and grandchildren. And that part of the story is shown in the book. And I tell us what happened, because I know for Peter, this is, and Simon, this is quite this is the first time you've come together.
Well, I had a phone call explaining that Nicky had found the documents for all these children that came to Britain, and he didn't know where they were now. And of course, they were the only souvenirs that the children, now adult, would have had of their families and their backgrounds. And it was quite clearly a fantastic story. I remember my first conversation with him on the phone, and I said to him, what an extraordinary achievement. And he said it wasn't enough. And I said, why wasn't it enough? And he said, because there was another train. There are 250 children I should have saved. So clearly he had all those other children in his heart. So Vera, your Vera Gissing, or Vera Diamant as she was in our album, we found her name there, was sitting next to Nicky. This in the front row of the studio. I recommend you don't ever believe a word I say, because what I said to Nicky was, we just want you here, Mr. Winton, to make sure that we've got the facts in our script right. And we certainly didn't tell him that he was sitting next to 2 Veras, both of whom had been children on his trains. So then I said to our director, I want you to show as many names as you possibly can of this album on the camera, so that if people recognize any of them, they will probably know for the first time, because most of them had no idea how they got to Britain and who was responsible for it. And I was asking them to come forward and get in touch with me. So we showed as many names as we possibly could. And then I said to Vera Gissing, who was sitting, I told her story. And then I said to her, she was sitting in the front row, Vera, you're sitting next to Nicholas Winton. Is there anything you'd like to say to him? And she just took his hand and she said, thank you for my life. And I used to sit on a rather large, high stool in the show. And the only time in 21 years of presenting that program, I looked at what was happening in front of me and I couldn't go on. And I said, can we stop a moment? Because we used to record the show. And I went away and I blew my nose and I wiped the mascara. And you know, for years watching that moment back, it moved me to tears. Well, there was a whole host of other people did watch the program, did recognize names. And so, as you say, Alexandra, what we did was we collected them into our second program. And this time, Nicky was really furious with me because on the first show, I wouldn't let him sit next to his wife. But for the second show, we let him sit next to his wife. I don't think he ever quite forgave me, but it made things a bit better. And then he, at a particular time, I said, would you stand up if you owe your life to Nicholas Winton? And he could hear the sound behind him of the audience standing, and he turned round and there they were. And then he was really moved. But I have two other magic memories of Nicky. Ah, there's the picture, there's the moment. Yes, I'm not sure I'm in your book, Peter, but I think I'm referred to.
I could never give it justice, but I tried my best.
But I have two other memories of Nicky. I was able to introduce him to the Queen because I think they held a reception of people of age 60 plus who were still making a difference. And he was there and I was there. And she came over to us. And so I told her the whole story, including the fact that he hadn't told anyone until we were able to tell the viewers. And he explained to the Queen that he thought it best to move on. So, and the other moment was he was knighted, quite rightly, for his services. And he went to, I believe it was a conference of young people, Peter, in Prague. And there was something like 2,000 of them there in this massive gate conference center. And he was on the stage. And whoever was presenting the conference said to the assembled young people, if the story of Nicholas Winton has made you believe that one person can make a difference, and if you've been inspired yourself to follow his example and try to make a difference, will you light your phones up if you too have done something in response to Nicky's story, Mr. Winton's, Sir Nicholas's story? And all around this conference room, 2,000 phones lit up. And then he was moved. He was really moved. Because that was what he most wanted. He wanted a legacy. He wanted people to learn from the terrible days of the Holocaust and not let it happen again. And his fear was, he used to talk about the Holocausts, because for him, Rwanda was another Holocaust. And for him, his fear was that we wouldn't learn. But I'm delighted to be on YouTube with Nicky Winton. That and this lovely book, which this weekend I'm going to read to my grandchildren because they're coming to see me for the first time since lockdown, and I will definitely show them this book. So thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, Simon, obviously it would be infinitely preferable for us to be in person together, although both of you are in the United States, so I doubt whether we would have been able to do this. Is there anything you would like to add or to what Esther's said?
Well, I would say just this, that, you know, books are about moral education. So, you know, as a publisher, there are a few that separate themselves from the others. And telling this story is one of those. It was, as Peter said, it was published in a difficult time in the United States. So there's always a need for stories about this particular kind of moral courage, particularly in difficult times, but always. So I'm immensely proud of this book, and having the opportunity to bring people together is also wonderful. I couldn't be more thrilled to hear, Peter and Dame Esther talking to each other. That's been kind of a wish since we started the project. So it feels like we've come to a moment of punctuation here. So thank you both.
Well, thank you very much, because I think this book is about light and it's about hope. And I think that's what all we need now. I can see the difference from last spring when we were sort of finishing, how this spring seems to be so much more hopeful. And so thank you. I did many books, usually about people I cannot meet. If it was Galileo or Mozart, I had one chance to meet His Holiness Dalai Lama when I did the book about Tibet, and Václav Havel, and now Dame Esther Rantzen, because you are in little screen on that picture with the TV show. So it's so touching that I can actually meet people I was trying to draw. And forgive me if I didn't do it well enough.
I want to thank all of you for being with us this evening. I was particularly moved, Peter, by the way that you portrayed the rescued children as they grew up into adults, as they were portrayed in that television screen, in the television studio, as you portray it on the front page of the front cover of the book, how those adults hold within themselves their memories, their parents, the memories of their parents, the memories of their childhood, but also the children they once were. And I suppose in remembering this evening, Yom Ha-Shoah, I think we have to pay tribute to all those who survived the Holocaust and the memories that they hold, the memories that so many of the people here this evening hold of people who perished. Yeah, Esther, please.
I'd just like to pay tribute to the parents. I can't actually imagine what anguish it must have been for them to put those children with a label and a suitcase onto a train going into no one knew what kind of future. So I want to pay tribute to them. And I think it's no coincidence that so many of those Winton's children, as we call them, have done so much for other people. And if I just mention one of them, Lord Alfred Dubs, who was a child on one of Nicky's trains, and who in the House of Lords was responsible for the Dubs Amendment to try and ensure that other unaccompanied children who are in refugee camps around the world find safe havens here. And so I think Nicky has had a legacy, because the courage and the vision that those parents left for their children, that the children inherited from them, and then we as a nation have benefited from. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? And it is, as you say, Peter, a story of hope.
That seems such a positive and good place to close our evening of witness statements, our evening of prayers, of music, and this wonderful conversation, if I can call it such, between the three of you. And I want, on behalf of all of us here, all those who are watching on Zoom, all those who are with us on our YouTube channel and on Facebook, to thank the three of you, Peter, Esther, and Simon, very much indeed for being with us and for sharing with us this beautiful book, which I urge you to buy for yourself, for your grandchildren, for your children. It's a beautiful book, and it says so much in a very profound yet simple way. And I want to thank you, Peter, for the work, and Simon, the work of producing this book. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much indeed. I ask you to put your hands together to thank our speakers and to express your thanks in the chat as well. It's been a wonderful evening and wonderful to hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Igor, for helping us with all the tech as well.
And thank you.
Thank you.